Hello and welcome back to StoryTime with Eric Zimmer. We've covered Walt Scott, Kai Nielsen, and Sylvia Holland. Now the next concept artist of the 1940s, Retta Scott. So you ready? Alright, let's begin. Chapter 4, Retta Scott. Retta was strong, had boundless energy, and drew powerful animals of all kinds from almost any perspective and in any action. No one could match her ability. Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston about Retta Scott. Fun fact, she was the first fully fledged female animator at Disney. Alright. There was so much raw strength in Retta Scott's drawings that when other artists saw them, they were convinced that they had been drawn by a man. Retta is well known among animation enthusiasts as the first woman to become an animator at the Disney studio. Beyond this claim to fame, Retta was a story artist of great talent. Along with Bianca Majoli, Sylvia Holland, and her friend Mary Blair, she was one of a handful of influential women in Disney's story department in the 1940s. Her story drawings and concept art designs do not deserve to be overshadowed by her admittingly masterful animation. Retta Ernestine Scott was born in Omak, Washington on February 13th, 1916. Even as a young girl, she was creatively driven. About the 4th grade, I was awarded a scholarship by the Seattle Biographical Notes written in the Music and Art Foundation, she recalled in a short series of autobiographical notes written in the 1980s. There I attended the creative art classes for 10 years. The foundation then planned a scholarship for me to go to the Chouinard Art Institute in Los Angeles, where I spent 3 years. Her colleague, Jamie Mitchell, elaborated on that period. At Chouinard, Retta was a student of Rico Lebrun. She loved his stuff. Rico was this big man that had this vibe of power. He'd come into the room with his cape and he'd draw these fantastic drawings. And Retta tells this story about how she would come in and he'd look at her drawings and he would say, "You gotta draw more like a man." Meaning, you have to draw with more power. Then he'd do some drawings and he'd leave them and they would just sort of fall to the ground. When class was over, he would leave, and Retta and a friend of hers, who was her roommate, would gather up the drawings and they would take them home. This went on for a period of time. They were living in Laurel Canyon and had plastered Rico's drawings all over the apartment. One day there was a knock at the door, and it happened to be Rico Lebrun, who'd pop in now and then. Retta was startled and scared because he walked into the room and took a look around at all these drawings. She was terrified and thought, "Oh my God, he's going to get so mad that I've stolen all these." Then he looked at her and he said, "Ah, you're finally getting it. Finally you understand what I'm saying. These are fantastic." Disney's first female animator. After Chouinard, Retta had her mind set on a career in the field of fine arts. But art-related jobs were difficult to find in the United States at the tail end of the Great Depression, as Retta explained in her autobiography. One may ask what prompted me to enter the cartoon industry, when for many years I had my heart set more on the fine arts of painting and illustration. However, ending my 3rd year at Chouinard Art School, the school director, Vernon Caldwell, suggested that I apply for work at Walt Disney's. He knew I loved to draw animals and spent much time doing this at the Griffith Park Zoo and the Wild Animal Farm in Thousand Oaks. At first I was a little disturbed about going to Disney, for up to that time, their pictures were the 7-minute cartoon shorts, including the characters Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Pluto, Goofy, and others they had developed. I had no inspiration to work on these cartoon shorts, and was completely unaware of all of the feature-length pictures and the planning at the studio. Vernon knew that Bambi was in the making and felt I should fit it in very well on this picture. So I began to work on Bambi in the story department on March 23, 1939 on Seward Street. I have always been very grateful to Vern for prompting me to work at Disney's. I was delighted with the work and surprised to learn of all the wonderful work being done throughout the studio. I was glad to know and to work with so many talented artists. For many months we worked on the storyboards until the walls started caving in. In this old studio, the termites had done their work. We moved to Burbank in the fall of 1939 into the new Disney studio, still under construction, into the animation building. I worked with director Tom Kodrick on the sequences of Feline and Bambi and the hunting dogs. I developed the hunting dogs into vicious, snarling, really mean beasts. And here are some sketches of hers. I spent weeks on the dogs, and almost every day, instructor Rico Lebrun came to my room to give me much advice and support. I admired his tremendous draftsmanship and vivid enthusiasm. It really inspired me. By August of 1940, I finished all 3 sequences, and they were ready for the layout men and the animators. It was then that David Hand and Walt felt that I should animate the dogs and the deer in these sequences. Dave came in each morning to show me the principles of animation and timing. My first test was used for the picture. I was so pleased. The men artists were stunned. As animators Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston wrote in their book about Bambi, a startling moment for us came when we saw Retta Scott's amazing sketches of the vicious dogs chasing Feline and keeping her cornered on a high ridge. We wondered who at the studio could have drawn this terrifying situation so convincingly, and would have guessed that such virile drawings could have been done only by some burly man, probably with a bristling beard and the look of an eagle in his eye. We were amazed to find instead that they were done by a small, delicate, wonderfully cheerful young woman with twinkling eyes and a crown of blonde curls piled on top of her head. Retta was strong, had boundless energy, and drew powerful animals of all kinds from almost any perspective and in any action. No one could match her ability. When artist Bianca Majoli joined the story department in 1935 as its first female artist, the Disney studio had experienced what amounted to a small revolution. Retta becoming an animator on August 6, 1940 was a major one. In Walt's mind, the story artists were a dime a dozen, but the animators were at the very top of the totem pole, the creme de la creme, the irreplaceable creative engine of the studio. By becoming an animator, Retta Scott had joined the Phi Beta Kappa of Disney, and she knew it. How did Walt decide to start opening the doors of the animation department to a woman? The successes of Bianca Majoli, Sylvia Holland, and Mary Blair in the story department had clearly helped his thinking evolve. But there were also some more practical considerations that he detailed in a speech given in front of an all-hands meeting on February 10th, 1941. An ugly rumor is that we are trying to develop girls for animation to replace higher-priced men. This is the silliest thing I have ever heard of. We are not interested in low-priced help. We are interested in efficient help. Maybe an explanation of why we are training the girls is in order. First, I would like to qualify it with this: that if a woman can do the work as well, she is worth as much as a man. The girls are being trained for in-betweens for very good reasons. The first is to make them more versatile, so that the peak loads of in-between and inking can be handled. Believe me when I say that the more versatile our organization is, the more beneficial it is to the employees, for it assures steady employment for the employee, as well as steady production turnover for the studio. The second reason is that the possibility of a war, let alone the peacetime conscription, may take many of our young men now employed, and especially many of the young applicants. I believe that if there is to be a business for those young men to come back to after the war, it must be maintained during the war. The girls can help here. Third, the girl artists have the right to expect the same chances for advancement as men, and I honestly believe that they may eventually contribute something to this business that the men never would or could. In the present group that are training for in-betweens, there are definite prospects, and a good example is to mention the work of Ethel Kolzar and Sylvia Holland on the Nutcracker Suite, and little Retta Scott, of whom you will hear more when you see Bambi. Retta had no intention of disappointing Walt. My director, Eric Larson, gave me much encouragement and guidance while I was doing my scenes. The dogs were so active and fast with the running and scrambling about, trying to climb the cliff and sliding back. Sometimes there were up to three dogs in a scene, and sometimes there were as many as a dozen. So it was hard to keep track of each one, and I had to remember, if one fell, to bring it back in the scene. This was sort of straight-ahead animation and active timing. There was not much need for in-between work, and had only been working on the dog, and as I only had been working on the dogs, Eric felt that I should clean them up myself where needed. I estimate that during that year I had drawn over 56,000 dogs for Bambi. When I finished all the cleanups, they became ready for the inkers and painters. The process, however, was more cooperative than what Retta implied in her autobiographical notes. As veteran animator Don Lusk explained in 2012 to animation historian Joe Campana, I was responsible for Retta's first animation. She had no idea about timing, but she drew the meanest looking dogs you ever saw. So I just took her drawings and I just slid them around and repegged them and retimed them for her. She used my assistant's room, and my assistant moved to the next room. Story artist first and foremost. Those early years at the studio were a delight for the young Retta. She was just the nicest, funniest person you could meet, remembered Bud Lucky, who worked with her at the end of her career. She always was upbeat and direct. Her laugh was great. I can hear it now. While at Disney, she used to walk to work from time to time. Walt would sometimes see her and give her a ride the rest of the way to the studio. Many years later, she would confide that she saw Walt as a second father. That second father would chide her at times, like when he saw her feed the cats at the Burbank studio. As a good Midwesterner, Walt feared that the well-fed felines would become less effective as rodent deterrents. After Bambi, Retta animated the Centaurettes in the Pastoral Symphony sequence for Fantasia briefly, and helped design the weasels in The Wind in the Willows. But the later project was shelved due to the financial troubles that the studio was experiencing in 1941. In May 1941, the infamous strike started. Retta did not join the protests. Only 3 animators were left in her